stage, turn this thing up.
Bring it in. Read option back, full crew, loaded, NFL draft over, NBA playoffs in full swing. And there's a whole lot to talk about, including the city of Philadelphia is at such odds and ends with one another. They just had to trade away Joel Embiid's face to actually get a good draft for once in their life. A lot's going on. I'm back from Philly. Had to say goodbye to the family house this weekend, which was an emotional journey, but we got the whole team together. Scott and I getting loaded up for an exciting weekend coming up. We're going to the Wells Fargo Championship, TPC Potomac, which will be a ton of fun this weekend. So we'll give you a live report next Monday or Tuesday, rather. From
Stay away, rain.
Yes, we're praying right now. The weather's looking a little iffy, so pray for us. We need all the weather gods on our side. Vido back from California at a draft party. We're gonna get the full lowdown of what it was like to be at a draft party in which a guy actually got the call, got drafted, and is going to be a Philadelphia Eagle on top, as you can see from Scotty's hat and my shirt. Or Vito's hat. Man, I'm just fucking up names left and right. Boys, how are we doing? Draft is over, but exciting and really interesting draft. I think one of the most compelling drafts we've had here, probably in the last decade plus, with a absolutely loaded undrafted free agency class as well because of the COVID backup. How's everybody? I'm excited to get into ball today.
No, I'm great, man. Like you said, it was out in California, in my old neighborhood, with the Calcaterras, and man, it was just good to see everybody and obviously celebrate a kid who's done so damn much and sacrificed so much for his dream. And to get that call was one of the most special moments in my life, and I wasn't drafted. You know what I mean? It was really a beautiful and euphoric feeling, and just so happy for him and his family, and you know. So incredible weekend. Was on planes a lot, and now I'm back to reality, but man, just totally worth it, and was so fun, man.
Love it. Scotty, I know you were a little disappointed with your Niners. However, you're not you can't complain right now because the Warriors are up 1-0 in the second round of the NBA playoffs, which we'll get to some of that stuff in the back end of the pod here as well. So vintage Steph Curry got a third splash, bro. I think has fully cemented himself that way. Sports in the Valley, it may not be exactly what you hope for, right? It's never always sunny. But at least you got that franchise quarterback, on the roster, hopefully still. So there's plenty of stuff to get excited about.
Yeah, the Niners just annoy the hell out of me. I don't know why. Of course, I'm not as smart as John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. I don't know why we need 14 running backs, but okay, let's go out and draft 2 more. I guess.
I know why, because they can never stay healthy. You lose 3 of them a year.
Because all we do is run the ball with Kyle. Yeah, that's right. Jesus. So let's trade all of our. Oh God. Oh, we'll get into it anyway.
Hard to complain with the track record the Niners have had over the last couple of years.
I guess. Well, we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I spent most of drafts Saturday, rounds 4 through 7, just working outside, and I had the TV out there, and I was working out on the lawn and drinking a few beers, and I had the TV on loud. Thankfully, not the my headphones on mowing the lawn or anything when I heard Grant's name called. So that was really fun for me because we all got a little stoked. And yeah, I just one of my favorite weekends is draft weekend, just to see. I think it goes underrated, throughout the first, maybe less so on the first day because they talk about it a lot. But even the kids at the back end in 2 and 3 on the Friday, and then 4 through 7 on the Saturday, the reactions from them and the people around them to see their dream come true live is really cool. Every year, and it never gets old.
Oh, for sure. It's the draft is a really, and we said this at the end of the pod on Friday, but just it's a truly unique sporting event, and it's weird to even call it a sporting event because there is no games being played. No one is winning and losing, and we'll get to that when we kind of quote unquote grade out the draft, because I'm not a fan of picking winners and losers. I'm not a fan of giving, A, B to different teams because we honestly have no idea, right? How many, the Patriots probably would have gotten a C if we were doing that the year they drafted Tom Brady. It ends up being the greatest draft pick in NFL history. So, and I understand that's, an extreme example, but nonetheless, we have to just appreciate it while it's here, because the draft is so much fun. You get an opportunity to see your team start to build their future. And especially this year, because so much of the impetus wasn't on the quarterback position, an unusual year to say the least. One quarterback taken in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. And only then you add 3 there in the 3rd round, when multiple teams reportedly had first round grades on guys like Desmond Ritter, Malik Willis, Matt Corral, and we didn't see them go until the end of the day on Friday. So whole lot to get to, including the Eagles making, I think, the best pick of the draft there in the 3rd round, and praying the medicals are as accurate as they say they will. Some news and notes here before we get into the NFL draft. And I will say one last thing about my weekend too, because I did want to mention this. I did say goodbye, as I said at the top, to my childhood house this weekend. Super emotional weekend. Was around my family the whole time, watched old home movies, watched slideshows from our high school graduations, drank a lot with the parents, went to our favorite restaurants one last time. It's a cool thing. And if you're lucky enough, now my parents owned that house for 27 years. And I knew nothing else, right? That was the house I grew up in. It was my home, right? And you always felt like, even though I went to school in Virginia and I live in DC in Virginia, and you're going around these different places, you still always felt like, oh, I have home base, right? Like when you're a kid and you're playing, tag or whatever, and oh, I'm at home base, right? Like there is something to that as an adult in real life. And if you have that, if you're lucky enough to have that still, and whenever you go home, live your life. That's what my parents always told me to do. Go out. They would have beat me if I, stayed home, just for them, right? Just for that kind of thing. But when you do get home, take pictures, take the mental snapshots, and appreciate it, because it was really sad. It was an awesome thing. My parents are starting a wonderful new chapter, and I'm excited for them. But it was a heavy emotional weekend, because you have all these memories, and it ended too. One of the last things I did before I left, my dad and I had a catch in the yard. We had an old school father-son. I swear I heard Cats in the Cradle going on in the background, right? Just having one last catch in the yard. It's a special thing, man. It really is. So enjoy it while you have it, and appreciate it, because when it's gone, and you're on to your next stage in life, and you can't just walk in the front door of that same place that you've had your whole life of memories. And it's a weird kind of dichotomy, but it's something to think about too, as we all kind of enter. And most of our listeners, by the way, fall under this category of people our age who have parents moving on, parents retiring, doing different things. And it's just a reminder, right? Appreciate all those moments while you got them. All right, let's talk some news and notes. Right before we broke off, 2 pieces of NFL notes or news broke. DeAndre Hopkins suspended 6 games for the 2022 season for violating the substance and drug policy there for performance enhancing drugs. Already, D-Hop has been, I don't want to say on a decline, because I feels like that catch against Buffalo happened. I mean, it was the 2020 season, right? The Kyler Murray miracle throw. I forget the Hail Murray. The Hail Murray. Thank you. They had that unbelievable play, and that whole year in 2020, he was still one of the best wide receivers. But I wonder, and it's got me thinking, like, in this new age of wide receivers, how talented are we? Just saw it with the NFL draft. That cliff, right? For wide receivers in particular, when you start to lose a step, I think that's a position we don't talk about, the cliff, as much, but it does seem to happen. You'll start to see guys bounce around teams at the end of their career. I think of like guys like Brandon Marshall, who
AJ Green, even who's opposite D-Hop there in Arizona.
And now this is obviously a bummer, but D-Hop missed most of the season last year with an injury. And when he was on the field, he wasn't that productive. And all in all, it still feels like D-Hop's a relatively young guy. So is this kind of the beginning of the end for D-Hop? I mean, he's owed, I believe it's $26 million this year, which, is one of the top 5 highest paid wide receivers in the NFL. And look, things can turn around and bounce back. He's never necessarily been a pure burner, but for a dude who's been in the league now longer than you think, I think he's been in the league almost 10 years. This one was a little surprising, and it's a huge hit to an organization that I kind of feel is like borderline, like, need to have a good season this year.
Yeah, I think again, and they made the move to get Marquise Hollywood Brown. So it's a big blow because they're bringing him in from a number one spot to be a number two, right? Because they lost Christian Kirk, and it just, now you're going to have to lean on him for the first 6 weeks of the season. And we all know if you get off to a bad start, it's a really hard thing to climb back from in the NFL, especially with a guy like Kyler, who usually plays his best games early. And to your point, he gets beat up and everything later in the season, usually is where their losses happen. So I just think that this is a really hard test now for this offense. And to your point, a critical year for Kyler, especially after everything in the offseason. Like, it's all on him now, really, for the first 6 weeks and how this whole season starts.
Yeah, and it's a year that Kyler needs to stay healthy too. For D-Hop, I don't know, man. I don't think it's the beginning of the end. I think he has a legitimate streak of talent left still in him. And hey, missing 6 games this year, even though it was for performance-enhancing drugs, which may or may not have been, and we don't know all the details yet, may have been something to offset the pain that he was going through. He's been banged up over the last 2 years himself. So we'll see what that means, in terms of his overall health. But I don't think it's the beginning of the end. I think talent-wise, he's still got plenty left in the tank for him to be a viable number one wide receiver in the NFL for another good few years here.
And maybe it's just being pessimistic, but I'm just looking at a lot of the contemporaries, but guys who are just a few years older than D-Hop, right? Julio Jones. Yeah. When Julio Jones, what did Tennessee trade for him? It was like a 2nd and 3rd round pick to get him from Atlanta to Tennessee.
And a pig, I think. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And he couldn't stay healthy. I think the health aspect of it is the hardest thing. AJ Green was the same way. You mentioned him, Scott, right? You think of guys like Ocho Cinco and T.O. and Brandon Marshall and these guys who towards the ends of their careers were bouncing around from team to team because everyone still holds out hope that they still have that value, but the production isn't there. And I think the biggest thing is on the field.
So the one thing I just, Zach Paca just hit me up and told me stats and research, pulled it up. One surprising stat, DeAndre Hopkins got in the league young, which is why you think he's probably older than what he is. He is 29 years old. Mm-hmm. And so is Devontae Adams. Tyreek Hill is 28. Julio's a full 4 years older at 33, but injuries age players. That's what we've always heard, right? Like, so yeah, to your point, injuries like this, and if it does come out that they are performance enhancing, then that changes the whole conversation, because that probably means mentally he feels like he had to do that to get back to the edge, right? Or was it just to recover off the injury? There's a lot of reasons why players do that, but either way, there's some aspect of, hey, I need to get back out there, and he viewed that he needed that to do it. Or, we'll see what all happens, to your point. Maybe it has nothing to do with that. But what I do think matters is that he's getting to this point in his career where he's played a lot of snaps and he's already moved teams once in a blockbuster trade. Now let's see what happens here next.
Yeah, I guess in my eyes, I'm curious because we have seen for a long time guys who want, again, these wide receivers who hit that point, whether it's injuries, whether it's age, they do start to bounce around. And then you look at the last 3 years of the draft and you look at all the guys that hit 3 years ago, all the guys that hit last year, and then all the guys who got drafted in the first round this year. It feels as though there's kind of two schools of thought when you look at wide receiver. They have the elite guys in the first round, but then there's so much depth later on in the draft that it has started to become kind of running back-esque, where in terms of the depth, right? Like, we don't need to, for other teams who need a wide receiver but don't want to draft one in the first round, they're like, we can still get like a Christian Watson from, Green Bay going at pick 34. The John Mechie's of the world, Tyquan Thornton, George Pickens, Alec, all these guys who we just saw get drafted on day 2 of the NFL draft. I mean, if you look just at, I think it's upwards of 20 plus wide receivers drafted in the first 3 rounds of the NFL or of the draft this past weekend. I feel like maybe the shelf life for guys who are established to maybe have a couple injuries is going to start to change. I don't think we're going to see, look at AJ Brown. AJ Brown's not, Julio Jones. Julio Jones isn't signed right now, right? He got released from Tennessee and he's a free agent, and someone's probably going to gamble on him because it's Julio Jones. But if you can get younger players at better value where you don't have to take the risk of injury and you can still get them for cheap deals, or you can draft them and have them under control for 4 years. That might start to be where we see the NFL go with wide receivers, because if the D-Hops and these guys are doing things, and again, we don't know all the details. This literally broke 30 minutes ago, right before we started. It could be a danger. The other bit of news that broke right before we started here was Tyrann Mathieu finally finds a home. He's going home to Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and Louisiana. We're going to see him in the Saints uniform. The Saints feel to me like they are loading up right now. Like they believe that they can win right now, and their draft reflected that. And then going out and giving $33 million contract, $18 million guaranteed for Tyrann Mathieu. They draft Chris Olave, they trade up to get him, and then they get Trevor Penning. They traded with the Eagles to get a second first-round pick. Two guys who should be immediate plug-and-play starters for them. One will help replace Tyron Armstead there. How much do we believe in New Orleans? Now, Vito, I know you are like our resident Jameis Winston fan. I liked what I saw from Jameis in year 2 in New Orleans, his first time as a starter. But again, I'm not 100% sold on that.
I think it's going to depend on how they operate on the offensive side. If Michael Thomas comes back and you have Olave, that's a whole different dynamic than what they had last year. Last year, he was very much conservative. And if you look at the numbers, wasn't pushing the ball down the field, which is where he excelled. That's why in Tampa, he threw for over 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, like in one season. It was incredible. I mean, 30 picks, I get he had. But, in general, you don't get that without the risk reward factor. And it's a lot, I would say, it's easier to take shots downfield when you can trust in your guys to go make the plays. So I do agree with you that they drafted to support this offense in their first 2 picks. And hopefully we see that make this offense open up a little bit more, push the ball down the field and challenge them a bit. I do think, to the previous conversation, a lot of this depends on how Michael Thomas comes back from his whole situation. So I think that has a huge effect on where the Saints play this year. But are they still in salary cap hell? I believe, right? They are.
Relatively. They're getting out of it. They're in purgatory, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
So look, right. So they moved on from Malcolm Jenkins, right? Malcolm Jenkins retires. That takes some salary off the books. The Teron Armstead was a huge reason why they were in such cap salary hell last year. So some of the guys that left and or retired helps free some of that up for sure. But the other thing too is that I'm almost of the belief now that like cap issues don't matter in the NFL. These guys are so good at understanding how to manipulate the cap to work in their favor that I just don't think it affects them in the same way. But I have my concerns, right? Since 2020 was the last time Michael Thomas played. There's been 2 full seasons since Michael Thomas played. He played 7 games in 2020. 7 games in the last 2 seasons, I should say. That's the accurate way of putting it. But I don't know. I guess if Michael Thomas comes back and is good, you have Olave there. You have the 2 guys, Traycon Smith and Marquez Callaway. So you have some other guys there. Running back room, Alvin Kamara right now is dealing with his legal stuff because we don't know what's going to happen with that. That's just starting to go to trial, I believe, this summer. So they're making a push for it, which they have 2 quarterbacks, which is what we said last week when we were talking about previewing the draft, why I didn't think they would go quarterback. It's because they had Andy Dalton, right? You don't go out and pay that money for a quality backup if you don't expect to be able to make a run, because just carrying 3 quarterbacks is becoming more and more of a rarity these days in the NFL. But we'll see. I mean, Tyrann Mathieu, if nothing else, it's cool that he's going home. It's cool that he's going to get a chance to play for the Saints.
And keep in mind, too, Dennis Allen's secondary guy. So to have an anchor like Tyrann Mathieu there on the secondary, Dennis Allen, the new head coach of the New Orleans Saints, that's going to be a huge help for them, because that is a young secondary right now.
Yeah.
And they're going to need all the help they can get.
Well, they still have the cornerback, right, from Ohio State from a couple of years ago.
Lattimore.
Marshawn Lattimore, who is one of the top 5, arguably, cornerbacks in the NFL. So you have a top tier guy there. Now you're going to help solidify the back end of it. I know I was bummed as an Eagles fan because I was really hoping the Eagles were going to be pulling off, something for Tyrann Mathieu, but that didn't work out. And we'll see where it goes from there. All right, let's move and turn our attention to the NFL draft. And we have to start off because you touched on it a little bit in the open. I need the full play-by-play here, Vito, of what it was like to be there at a draft party, right? Because that's a pretty rare experience that most people don't get an opportunity to do. Now, Grant was not a first, second round pick. He wasn't a day one guy, ends up going in the 6th round to the Eagles. But what is that experience like? The anticipation of you're sitting there, somebody you care about, everyone there is all focusing on the phone, but no one can really talk about it because talking about it's only going to make it worse. Walk us through what that experience was like as a friend, but also just as a fan, someone who loves football like you do, to just observe all of that from, up close and personal kind of seat.
Yeah, well, I think to lay the, I guess, groundwork, or to paint the background of what was happening, is I went out there and the whole family came back home. So there's Nick, my best friend, Nick Calcaterra, his triplet siblings, Grant being one of them, Claire and Andrew all came back home, and his parents were there. Grant's girlfriend, Sophie, but we were all able to get together, and we were together Friday night. I was there watching the draft a little bit, which was just fun because, again, like, go back a decade, I was watching the draft with this family, right? 2 decades, I was watching the draft with this family. So it was fun to just be around them. And that was cool on Friday because, again, the projection was probably a Saturday pick. Then Saturday comes around and it's in the morning, right? It starts at 9 a.m. We're on the West Coast, so 12 Eastern, and have some breakfast, kind of anxious. But then right away on ESPN, Louis Riddick has 5 people that he said watch out for in day 3, and Grant was like the 3rd person on that list, which was awesome. And he was talking about the upside and how crazy the upside is there. And Louis Riddick is a guy who I really respect. So unlike Booger, like, I'm not a fan of Booger, but I love Louis, and so it was cool to have that. But as we're getting closer, right, and some tight ends come off the board, a lot went off in round 4, and it's a little nerve-wracking, right? Because, like, personally, I just know Grant's better than them, right? But we're not trying to have any negativity in the room. We're not all like, oh, screw that guy. That's not going on. It's kind of quiet, like, oh, okay, another tight end. That's almost, it was like, that's good because there's less on the board now. And, like, there's more, right? Like, if someone does want one, then you're the guy. Then it started getting later and later. And, like, the Ravens took a second tight end, and then I believe in the 5th round, or maybe the 4th, but right, they took a second tight end. Some other tight ends going off the board, and it did get a little, I would say, quiet in the room, right? We're getting nervous. We know it's around now, and it's in the 6th round, so maybe it's now or never. In the 4th round, thanks, Scotty. That's where the Baltimore took the second tight end. But then a couple players went, and to be honest, it was, it was a little nerve-wracking. You're in the room, but like you said, you want to be positive. It got real quiet. And then all of a sudden, Grant got a call. And he was taking some calls for the day, just from Asian, all this other stuff. But he gets the call, and it's kind of quiet. He just, like, picks it up and puts his head down, right? And he's just like, all we hear him say is 13 or 14. And I'm like, okay, that's how many tight ends have been drafted, because we've been, keeping track. And then all of a sudden he says, yes, sir, I promise I'll make you a better team. We were like, no fucking way. Like, instantly everyone started crying. And the emotion in the room went from, like, this anxious tension of, like, just please God, for, like, Grant's sake, let him get this call today anywhere, and he gets the call, and he's talking to them for a while, right? And we're all like, I mean, everyone's crying. My job being a non-direct family member, I was going to video this, and I knew that was kind of my job. So then I get up and start videoing, like, them all around the couch, and at one point, like, there are a couple picks coming up, and at this point we didn't know who picked them, right? And if you actually go back now on Eagles, I think on their Twitter, they have the sound clip in a video of Howie from his side, and you can hear him, and they have Grant's audio in it too, and it's really great because it was sliced up a little bit, but it was like, Howie asked him, like, how many tight ends have been drafted today? And he's like, 13 or no, it's 14. And he's like, how would you like to be the 15th? And he was like, are you fucking kidding me? And he was like, yeah, like, welcome to, and he's like, we're going to take you with our next pick here. Like, welcome to the Eagles. And Grant had his opening line to him was like, I'm going to make this team better. I promise you. Like, and just, that was his first statement to them. And just from that point on, it was absolute fucking chaos. Cause again, it was very tension ridden. The anxiety was through the roof, but then when it happened, it was one of the most euphoric, beautiful feelings I've ever felt. And it wasn't me getting the call.
That's great.
It was just, you're so happy for this kid who's sacrificed so much and worked so hard, and his whole family, and just the support they have for him, and how great of it, like, and Grant's a great human, which is like, you just hope it happens to a guy like that. And I'm just so happy that he ended up getting the call, getting drafted, and immediately chaos broke out. I was telling you guys that we ran to go get all the Eagles gear from a California store, which was a limited selection, as you can imagine. But we get back, he does some Cleveland media stuff. And for me, like, you're just happy he gets drafted. Then it sunk in, like, dude, he's coming to my city. He's coming to Philly. Like, this is going to be so fun.
Yeah.
Like, I can't wait to see him. The whole family's going to be out there a lot and stuff. And now, but, you know, his whole thing obviously is like, he gets picked and he's like, all right, like, this is fun. We celebrated, don't get me wrong. But he was just like, he said at one point, like, after it settled in, he's like, you know, I still got to go play football. Like, in his mind, it's like, hey, I got drafted, but like, I still got to go. I'm gonna go
make
do
the
this
team.
shit.
Right.
Yeah. Like, and just like work his ass off and obviously deliver on that promise to make the team better. So it was an experience I will never forget. I'm very thankful to, you know, be close to a great family and a great person like Grant, as talented as he is, you know, humble and good. And it's just going to be a really fun career to follow, and obviously a friend of the Read option. So we'll have to get him on here soon. And his life's a little chaotic right now. So once it settles a bit, we'll hook it up and get him on here.
We have a soft tentative yes, or maybe we'll call it a maybe. We have a maybe with Grant, but the Calcaterras have been supporters of the podcast. That story's it's unbelievable, man.
It's great, man.
A firsthand account to be there and witness that, because that goes just to what Scotty was talking about, right? Like, to start off the show, like why this stupid night is as big as this, why they can shut down part of the strip in Las Vegas, why they can shut down Ben Franklin Ben Franklin Way, I forget what it's called, in Philly, right? You know, like, why they can shut down
Philly
major
guy.
cities. Shut up. And put on this event where people do, and it's because lives do get changed, man. And
Yeah.
Anyone who competed in a sport, even tried to play in college and never ended up, but you did the recruiting circuits, you went through that, the sacrifices your family makes to get you there, right? And for 99.999% of us, you never get even close to a moment like this. And for him and his story to leave football and then to come back to do the extra year at SMU and to get involved with a great organization, an organization that has the string of tight ends and the history of tight ends with this team is strong, going all the way back to Mike Ditka used to play for the Eagles, right? It's special.
No, I was just going to add in, I was like, I do think what is so special about this, and I don't think I understood the gravity of it. And I knew it happened, but being there, one thing that I think is a hard thing to translate is it's not just what team he's going to, right? You don't know. Imagine this. Imagine you're graduating college and you have your profession, right? For me, it was architectural engineering. And imagine, whether it's broadcast or anything, imagine you graduate and you wait for a day to come. And not only do you get a call for what company you're going to work for, but it also determines where you're going to live. Like, he didn't know what city he was going to until that call came through, and where he would be living in the whole country. And it could be Detroit. It could be,
Cincinnati. It could have been Jacksonville.
Anything. Yeah. And so to end up again in, the 1 out of 30, I guess I live in 2, but one of the cities I live in too, and like that there's an NFL team there, and that he already has a foundational support, and there's some other connections there too with him. But it was just cool to talk to him about that, because as we were going through the process, it was like, what about this? Oh, that's a cool place to live. Or like, oh, maybe that doesn't really fit my style. And so it's just interesting that like that happens to a kid. He's a kid before his first job. He's being told where to move and where to go. And that kind of happened to me when I joined my company. They said, hey, you're going to North Carolina, which wasn't my first pick, so to say. But it's just a really interesting dynamic that I think when you see the emotion, obviously it's about football and being drafted in the dream, but a lot of it can also be, oh my God, that's the organization I'm joining. And, that's the city I'm moving to. And there's so much, it's not just one thought. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things all being decided in a matter of one phone call.
Yeah, talking about Grant Calcaterra, 6th round draft pick for the Philadelphia Eagles, 198th overall, tight end out of Southern Methodist University. Vido, can you walk me through, A, are you excited that he's coming to your city, one of the two that you live in, and B, how do you think he fits for the Philadelphia Eagles? And I think, Jeff, you can jump in on that question too.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm more than excited. Just for me too, it's again, this is a great family, and I can't say that enough. And I'm just excited that like I go on trips with them. We always go to music, like a concert or a festival every year together, me and all the kids. And like Nick's my best friend. We fly back and forth across the country to see each other. And I'm just so excited that now, I've gone to a couple games, whether it be an SMU game, Oklahoma games, like whatever it is. But now I'm just excited, like, hell, they're in my backyard, and they can crash on my couch, his siblings, and like, it's just going to be a fun ass time. Show him around Philly. I think he's really going to fit in and like it more than he even knows. Right. And what's going to be awesome is I think it's a great fit, because one of the analysis I read was like behind Goddard, which, by the way, Grant worked out with Goddard all summer long in California. They're rep one. They train with the same people. So yeah, he knows Goddard. Like they train together. So that's awesome connection already. But Jeff, you jump in on this, because you were explaining to me the position differences and how they run it. But behind Goddard, there's really not a second great receiving tight end that the Eagles have, and they use so many multiple tight end sets. So yeah, what is this position difference that happened here recently?
Well, so I think it's a fantastic pick. Ultimately, again, if he doesn't retire, if he stays at Oklahoma for 4 years, I think he ends up probably being a day 2 pick, maybe an early day 3 pick, right? I think that third round is probably where we would have seen him in this class. The reason I'm a big fan of it, and I look forward to, again, getting a chance to talk to Grant about this and how he sees himself fitting here at some point, over the next couple months once he does get settled. And we're going to do a whole Philly training with him. We're going to get him ready for the Philly fans, because it's a different breed. But I have a feeling he's going to ingratiate himself well. And I already know that Philly fans, when they heard that he came back to football because of how much he missed football, that already sold a lot of Eagles fans on this. So already I think he's off to a great start. But from a position standpoint, they run 2 different tight ends in this offense, right? You have your wide tight end, who's going to be in line a lot of times, and then you're going to split him off a little bit, right? Your wide tight end, you're going to have him run blocking, which we see a lot of Dallas Goedert doing. You're going to have him running play action out of that set a lot, and that's basically your tight end 1, right? That's the guy who's your main guy. We saw Ertz do it for years, and then they slowly started to kind of get Goddard in there until they traded Ertz away. But then they also dabble in this F tight end, which is sometimes you'll have him at the line, but for the most part, they want to be able to spread him out a little bit. And Sirianni did this a bunch when he was in Indianapolis as well. So you're going to have him playing out of the slot, and that's basically going to be your receiving tight end for nothing else, right? You can think of your Mike Gesicki's in that kind of a light. He's going to do some downfield blocking, which at his size and his speed and everything else, he should be able to take on a nickel cornerback and downfield blocking pretty comfortably. Oh, yeah. I think he's going to do great at that. But right now, if you look at the Eagles roster, I mean, they just moved J-Jaw down to tight end. They converted him to basically be this. So his competition, Grant's competition, is going to be J-Jaw, and then you have your kind of Jack Stoll, Tyree Jackson, who was the converted quarterback from Buffalo, who they converted him to tight end, who's a great athlete, but had a couple of freak injuries last year. I believe the last one ended up being an ACL tear too. So the tight end 2 position on the Eagles, which sometimes will be at that F tight end, sometimes will be at that wide tight end. It's a great spot for him. It's a perfect fit. It's a great compliment. And then you look at the other weapons that are on this offense, he's going to be a goal line guy. He's going to be a guy who comes in, but he's going to get open looks. He's going to get favorable matchups. And I think, again, when you turn on his college tape at Oklahoma, he was the heir apparent to Mark Andrews, right? Like, he was the guy that came in after Mark Andrews and Baker went on to the NFL, and he went in with Kyler and worked with those guys.
Hands, bro. Hands.
He can catch the ball as well as any of the tight ends in this class. And I think for what Philly's going to ask him to do, I think he works out really well. He's going to be probably a special teamer on like your punt units too. I don't see him on kickoff or kick return, maybe kick return, but given his concussion history, I think that could also be something that could be somewhat dangerous. But he was cleared by the NFL. He was cleared by every NFL team cleared him. Some teams were a little more scared off from it, and I understand that. But this is what the Eagles do. They find value in these late picks. Look at the guys the Eagles have drafted later on. And I believed in Grant that he was going to be a great NFL player. He has the absolute opportunity to be great. And I think the Eagles are a fantastic spot for him. So I know I texted you guys because I had just turned on the draft on Saturday. I drove 2 hours to the Jersey Shore to help my parents move shit down. Drove 2 hours back. Looked on the draft, and the Eagles were next in line, and then that was the Grant Calcaterra pick, and I lost my mind.
That's great.
The entirety of the Eagles draft was spectacular, and to have it end with Grant, I mean, that is the epitome of the cherry on top of the sundae that was the Philadelphia Eagles draft. So I'm excited, and the fact that we're going to have the first active NFL player we're going to have on this podcast is a Philadelphia Eagle, I think is incredibly fitting. I think it's incredibly fitting. So, and maybe if they're listening too, we can maybe twist his arm. We can do a sit down. Scotty and I'll drive up to Philly, and we'll do a sit down, real in person interview with Grant, because I think that would be
in the studio, man. Yeah, we'll have to hit that up. I do agree. And the last thing I'll mention about him as a player, then the day. First, him as a player. You're right. You watched that tape. It was wild to see how incredibly gifted he was compared to the players he was drafted around. And it's because of the medical retirement and coming back. When you watch him have multiple one-hand catches in the Big 12, in like literally the Big 12 championship game, a one-hand catch to win the game over Texas, like there are incredible moments. By the way, no Texas player was drafted this year. Pretty incredible.
Really?
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
And they've had 2 or 3 top 5 recruiting classes in the last 4 years.
Yeah. Wild.
Wow.
But there were some, let's just say there's a lot of Oklahoma ties in the house still. So we were noticing that. But that's right. Horn down.
Obligatory. I have to do the horns down now.
Oh yeah.
For Grant.
So then just for the day itself, what was really great again is that and I'll just say this, like right after the draft happens, right? We're all just huge group hug. We're all just like kind of relieved, like just amazing feeling. And then instantly it was just like, all right, we're going to party. Like instantly it turned into like an incredible party that started at like 1 p.m. and went very late. And then we had a DD drive us to In-N-Out. We had the beautiful Tudo Fresco, this place that is amazing in Southern California's Italian spot. And we just had an incredible night with incredible people, friends, of the family and his friends. And it was just a really great time. And I will say that like, the one thing that we all need to cherish, I think, is that there are days like this that come around where you get to celebrate some individual for something special in your family, right? Whether it be a birthday maybe or something special in their career, whatever it is. And this comes around, sometimes more often for some than others, but it was a great moment to see how much Grant shared this with his family almost, and I just think that if you have a guy like that in your locker room and a guy like that on your team, you're getting a real teammate. And it was, what he said to his family and private things, but he's just the right guy, and I think it's a lesson for us all of like, no matter how successful you are in your individual things or other people are in your family, like you guys all share in that together and the good and the bad. And it was a good family weekend, you could say. So just really, really awesome time and very proud I was able to go.
Beautifully said, Vido. I'm happy you were out there. And we used to do this segment on the radio where because it started off from a tweet that went viral a few years ago, but we ranked the best beers, and not like types of beers, but like the beach beer, right? The post mowing the lawn beer, right? I'd have to imagine that
during mowing the lawn beer,
there are very few beers that taste as good as the I just got drafted into the fucking NFL beer. That beer is at the top of the list.
And I'll tell you what Grant drank, because it was a pretty awesome beer. It was this sour beer that wasn't too sour from Arrowhead Brewing Company out of Southern California. And it was a crowler. It was a canned growler. So it was
so the big like 32 ounce. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was an incredible beer, but he was like, I'm saving this for when I get drafted. And Grant's a pretty big dude, but he opened that up and drank that. And he was like, because there wasn't much eating going on before he got drafted, but you could tell
it hits it pretty quick.
He was just like, oh, there we go. Yeah, like I'm ready to have fun.
That's amazing.
Feeling it.
That's amazing. All right, let's take a quick break. We will come back on the other side. We're going to break down our reactions from the rest of the NFL draft. Shout out to the Calcaterras and the Grant too, man.
Yes.
That's just unbelievable
Congrats.
Story. So we got NFL draft recap, and a little bit of NBA talk as we continue here on the pod. So the second and third rounds we had Friday, rounds 4 through 7 were on Saturday of the NFL draft. And there's a bunch of different directions we can go here, and we're going to hit on some different things. We're going to talk about some of our favorite late round picks. We're going to talk about some other stuff, but I think at least of Friday in particular, the two things that stood out to most people were the quarterback's not getting drafted in the second round, no quarterback draft in the second round. And then we had 3 go off the board in the third round. Those being, we had Malik Willis, Matt Corral, and Desmond Ritter, with Malik Willis being the last of those 3 to get off the
figure
board.
That one out.
Which
absolute steal.
Really surprising. It was a really surprising move to see. I mean, there's a ton of talent that obviously is there. Sorry, Matt Corral went after Malik Willis, but they were all teams that we thought we might see him go in the first round too, right? Desmond Ritter goes to Atlanta. Malik Willis goes to Tennessee. Matt Corral goes to Carolina. So they all ended up in the same place. It's weird with this draft, and this is kind of, I feel like, has been one of the overriding sentiments, is like, it didn't feel like any teams did anything really dumb. Like the team that got the most shit was New England drafting the guard from the FCS, Curtis Strange or whatever, something strange. It was a strange pick. Beat you, Scotty. I knew that was about to come out of your mouth. It was a strange pick. But they did the same thing with Logan Mankins years ago too, and everyone had the same reaction then. So if it ends up being Logan Mankins, then what the hell do we know?
They also did it with a guy named Tom Brady, but
I know we don't love grading people, but I was reading some of them, right? Like we all do after the draft. And I love it. They were like worst first round picks, right? And it was like Indy. It was like they didn't have a first round pick, but they traded it for Wentz, which is fucking stupid. And like that was the reasoning for. But you're right. Outside of like stuff like that, I feel like teams drafted players that fit or they need an improvement and they got the best available. Now, given we will be half wrong about all of this, right? Yes. At best, but I agree. I think that there weren't a bunch of giant question marks of why were teams doing this, where the Browns of like the mid 2010s were always like, what the fuck are you doing? The Raiders just basically picking the guy with the fastest 40 time every year out of the draft, like that. Those days are kind of gone, and seeing how I feel like maybe just conventional wisdom or analysis is really bleeding into a lot of these locker rooms. To your point, it wasn't like, oh, that team just did awful for 7 rounds straight, right?
Well, so this is what I actually want to talk about, because it bleeds into the other thing from Friday's, rounds 2 and 3 from the Friday day of the draft. Teams, we often put up like front offices. Simultaneously, we will destroy front offices without understanding what's actually going on, and also put them up on this pedestal like they're so smart. They understand things we don't understand. But a lot of times they fall under the same like human nature stuff that we do, right? And I think there was so much talk about in this draft being, oh, this is Christian Ponder draft 2.0. This is 2013 all over again. This is the Blake Bortles draft with Johnny Manziel in 2013, right? Like there was so much, or 2014, whatever year that was, but there was so much talk about that stuff that I think it scared teams off. Nobody wanted to be the Buffalo Bills taking my guy, EJ Manuel. I love EJ, but like no one wanted to be remembered as that team. And I think it's a domino effect. When one team feels it, then other teams start to feel it. And you can apply the same logic to Nakobe Dean. Nakobe Dean falling to the third round is lunacy. And that's the other thing I want to talk about here, because that's the other main story. I mean, talent-wise, he was the best player on one of the best defenses in the history of college football. And he fell to the third round because he was a little undersized. And even though the NFL sent out a league-wide memo clearing Nakobe Dean for immediate play, all of these teams started getting scared off. And it was like, all right, well, he fell to the second round because, the measurables, right? That was anticipated before we heard anything about the pec injury with Nakobe Dean. He was going to probably be a day 2 pick. And then, so he falls out of the first round. So already that slide starts. And then it's all right. Well, now the rumblings of this pec injury goes, and it's one team passed on it, and then it's 5 teams passed on it, and it's 10 teams. The next thing you know, a whole round has gone by because all these front offices sit there and go, well, what do they know that we don't know? And they have their own medical teams, but there is still this thought of, well, what do they know that we don't know? And that's the hyper competitive nature that I think just comes out in humans when you get put in a setting like this.
Exactly. If you watch the movie Draft Day, they do a great, but they do. It's a major theme of like anytime something happens with another team, the next team that's picking is like, whoa, what did you find out that we don't know? You know what I mean? And I think, Jeff, we had together with Zach Parker, looked this up earlier. How many linebackers were picked above Nakobe Dean? Because it's not just people stayed away from linebackers. That's one story, right? But I believe, what was the number? 12?
There were 6 inside linebackers and 6 outside linebackers. So 12. Now take outside linebacker with a grain of salt, because a lot of them are just going to be pure edge guys. Like technically Hassan Reddick is an outside linebacker, but he's going to just be being a pass rusher for the Eagles. But if you look at the linebacker position where they're listed, technically 12 went and 6 inside linebackers went ahead of Nakobe Dean, which I'm sorry, there's not 6 guys. There's not 6 inside linebackers that are better than Nakobe Dean. And Howie Roseman even said in the press conference, he was like, from the time we drafted our second round pick, which was a center, which I texted you guys, just absolutely throwing Howie Roseman under the bus. What a fucking idiot. How can Nakobe Dean fell to you in the second round? How are you not going to take him there, right? And look, Cam Jorgens looks like he's going to be a great player, and Jason Kelce hand selected him. But in that 1 round gap, it was about an hour, Howie Roseman said he called his medical team 5 times to be like, are you sure? Are you positive there's not anything more? And they're like, yeah, no, there's not. And that is honestly a credit to Howie Roseman, because if there's one thing on draft night that front offices lack the most of, it's trust, right? Because ultimately the medical staff isn't going to get crushed for Nakobe Dean being a bad pick. Howie Roseman's going to get crushed, right? So at some point you have to just trust your team. You have to trust the people that you hired to do their jobs. And if they're telling you that he is clear, he is good to go, then you have to say, all right, fine, I'm going to trust him, because the talent is undeniable. The tape does not lie when it comes to Nakobe Dean. So for the fact that the Eagles got a good interior offensive lineman, Jason Kelce's most likely, replacement, the fact that Kelce's also even willing to train his replacement like that speaks volumes of him as a person and how much he cares about this organization. But it's unbelievable, man. The slide of him and the quarterbacks, I think this is all just front offices being no different than you and I, right? Because we can sit here and say, oh, Malik Willis is a first round talent, all we want. But our names, our credibility isn't getting dinged any more than somebody who listens to the podcast is going to think, right?
Yeah. But I mean, when you hear it on platforms like ESPN and NFL Network, it's a whole lot different, especially 3-4 weeks out when we're hyping it up and hyping it up and hyping it up after the combine. The Nakobe Dean thing to me is absolutely nuts. Like measurables, and it sounds cliche, just throw all that out the window. Like, look at the tape and look at the guy who's playing and realize that he was on an excellent defense, an excellent defensive unit, and B, he was the leader of that defensive unit. So I don't understand why you would put any other stock into that. Take the best guy available.
My favorite thing about it is they're like, well, he was just, he was behind Jordan Davis. I was like, well, guess what? He's still behind Jordan Davis now.
Well, he's wearing the green dot. Like, what are you talking about?
I was just going to say that, Vido, right? Like that, and that's one of the things that the Eagles were in a unique spot to say, because now they have 3 studs to play defensive tackle between Jordan Davis, Javon Hargrave, and Fletcher Cox. So the one knock against him was, he was playing behind these between Wyatt and him. He was and Jordan Davis. Nakobe Dean was playing behind these guys, and it made it easier for him. The one thing that I think I call bullshit on that is that has no effect on a player's first step, right? It might make him more confident, right? That if he's wrong, he can change. But the first step is the first step when you're a linebacker. That is the most important trait. If your first step is there and you're faster than everybody else and you're reading plays and not just, by the way, we're not just talking about like he's playing, group of 5. We're talking about some of the best offenses in college football. His first step against Alabama, like the dude jumps off the tape for one of the best defenses in the NFL. And the 2 guys who got talked about the most on that defense all year are now both Philadelphia Eagles. And you got him in the 3rd round at pick 89. There's not 30 players better than Nakobe Dean in this draft.
And what's wild is that all 3 of our teams passed on him in the 2nd. All 3 of our teams had a chance to draft him in the 3rd, and Vido, I came first and we didn't draft him, and you came next and we didn't draft him, and then he fell right into Jeff's lap.
This is a thing, like, and I have 2 examples for this, right? The Eagles drafted Sidney Jones in the 2nd round. I think it was the 2017 draft, right? Sidney Jones was going to be a top 10 pick at cornerback out of Washington, tore his Achilles at his pro day, very similar to David Ojabo, right? So his draft status fell. He ended up being a second-round pick to Philadelphia, just like David Ojabo ended up being a second-round pick to the Baltimore Ravens. There is a risk-reward where you're saying, all right, he may not play this year, but we also drafted Jason Owe last year, if you're Baltimore, who ended up being a great pick. And we also have good pass rushers.
They played high school together. So
yeah.
They played opposite each other in high school.
Yeah, I forget. Yeah, great call. Right. So you're talking about like, all right, so we're okay at pass rusher for this season, but we're going to take a gamble on the talent. Our medical staff feels like, all right, he's going to recover. He's not going to have to play for a year and a half. Maybe if he's really fast, like, Cam Akers fast, we'll get him for a playoff run, but the pressure's not on him. Same thing happened with Sidney Jones. Well, Sidney Jones ended up not being what we all thought he was going to be. Right. And that is unfortunate. And that sucks. But if I was Howie Roseman, I'm still doing that pick again because of the risk reward, where you're saying at that time, Philly didn't need a plug and play starting cornerback, and you're getting this value in the second round. You're going to help rehab and you're going to get him there. I would do that same pick 10 times out of 10, and then you look at a guy like Ojabo. I think that is one of the biggest steals of the draft for Baltimore. I mean, the embarrassment of riches that they're going to have next year, and granted, it'll probably be 2023, but of young pass rushers who could play at a potential elite level is huge. And then I look at Nakobe Dean and I go, this is an even lower risk reward, right? If it's a pec tear, yeah, he's probably out for the year. But if it's a pec strain, which the NFL, again, league-wide memo to all 32 teams, cleared him of a pec tear and said he would be able to play right away. And he himself said it was a pec tear. And you talked about, and I don't know if you guys caught any of this, but in his press conference with the Philadelphia media, he was visibly upset, and talking about, I don't understand why there were all these lies and rumors spread about me. My mom spent half the night crying on Saturday because she didn't understand why all these people were just making stuff up. And I think ultimately that is the cold-hearted business side of the NFL where I understand it from the team perspective. If there is a risk and all these other teams are passing on them, do we feel confident enough to do that? But I commend the Eagles in saying, fuck it. You know what? If it's a strain, we still have 5 months before the start of the season. We still have another four months before camp starts, or 3.5 months before camp starts, and it's a pec strain, and he's feeling good. And and this is the other thing. It lit a fire under that dude. Like he said,
I'm sure.
he said as much. He's like,
yeah,
this cost me.
You don't want to get behind. You don't want to get behind an angry linebacker like that. I'll tell you what.
He said, and not to mention money, dude. Like his bank account is fucked from this.
Well, the other thing is what I don't understand is, let's say he's even out for the year. Ojabo is going to be out for most of the year. I still think I would have him over Ojabo, like in different positions, again, the edge side, and really Ojabo's an edge rusher, but still in the same, I guess when you have to look at a player who's going to be out for the full year, we had the Lions trade up to get a receiver who's probably going to be out for most of this year, right? Or at least the first 6 weeks at minimum. And well, I didn't say minimum, but they're probably going to end up on the PUP list so he can come back after week 6. But when you look at these teams and how they have to evaluate this talent, I just don't understand, even if he was out for a full year, how he could drop that far. So props to you guys. I think the Friday draft, again, was the story of quarterbacks falling and Nakobe Dean falling. The note that I had for day 3, if it's okay to jump there real quick, is
sure.
In the 4th round, again, that's where we saw some strange things start happening. We had a first kicker taken. We had the Browns take Cade York out of LSU. I mean, great kicker. Made a lot of 50+ yarders. And then we had 2 punters go, and they weren't Jordan Stout and Jay Camrata. They're great. Everyone fell in love with Matt. I'm going to mess up his name. I want to say Araiza every time. Thank you.
Araiza, sorry.
Araiza, yeah. And then San Diego, he's out of San Diego State. He's a guy who just had an absolute bomb. Like he would kick from his own goal line, and you just constantly see the defenders turning, the returners turning their back and running backwards because he would land on like the 20. He could punt it 80 yards in the air.
He set the FBS single season record with 51.2 yards per punt. He had 40 punts down inside the 20-yard line, which was the most in the FBS. And he also had six tackles. He's a good athlete.
Oh yeah, he sprints down the field. He was awesome. So anyway, to see all of that happen, and at that point, I just want to point this out. Towards the end of the fourth round, we had 3 kickers taken and 4 quarterbacks taken. Now that I'll put my mortgage on the fact that has not happened in the last 20 years. And I'd argue that probably hasn't happened since the common draft era, since the merger. But like, I don't know what's going on with that, but the fact that teams literally valued, some of those positions, I wouldn't say more than quarterbacks. Obviously that's not the case, but just the fact that we didn't see the run at quarterbacks. We saw a few there in the third round, but there wasn't this run on quarterbacks like we're used to seeing. And I just couldn't believe it. I think to me, that was so surprising to see place kickers and kicking specialists start to go while we still had, Sam Howell on the board.
Well, by the end of the third round, there were 8 offensive guards taken and 4 quarterbacks.
That's
it's wild to me. And I still believe, like, Sam Howell to me as the first pick in the 5th round is such a steal for Washington. And I know, like, I've said multiple times over the past few weeks leading up to the draft that, like, I am actually a pretty firm believer in Sam Howell. And I think that this is a year where we could see, like, the year Jimmy G got drafted, it was almost like reverse. Like, the players who got drafted, the quarterbacks who got drafted later in the rounds did better as they worked their way up to, I think it was Blake Bortles who went number 3 overall. And it was like almost like a perfect flip-flop, right? It was like Bortles and then Johnny Manziel, and then it was Derek Carr and Jimmy G and like there was one other quarterback drafted in that class too. But to me, like that makes it, I think there's a couple things that bled into it. I think next year's class, the depth at quarterback as well as the high-end talent is much better, right? Oh, yeah. But Malik Willis going to in the 3rd round is insane to me. It's insane to me. And I think Tennessee getting pieces that they needed, finding a replacement for AJ Brown, not having to pay him, and then you still end up with Malik Willis in the 3rd round. Like the Titans are one of the sneaky teams I think had one of the best drafts out of any other team because they're setting themselves up long-term while also getting themselves an immediate replacement for a very, very high-quality player in AJ Brown. I'm a huge fan of what that move says. Same thing with Atlanta. Atlanta goes out and gets Drake London, who they believe was the best wide receiver in the draft, right? They go out and they get Arnold, I think Ibakite, I think they also took, right? He's in Atlanta. And then, in our 3rd round, we're going to take a guy who, again, multiple teams had 1st-round grades on Desmond Ritter. And I love really Desmond Ritter. And the most common comp for him was Marcus Mariota. So Marcus Mariota is going to be the starting quarterback for Atlanta this year. So Desmond Ritter has a chance to come in and start and be, at least compete for a starting job. And I would expect that we'll see Desmond Ritter at some point this year. All of these picks, Matt Corral to Carolina, there was tons of talk about, is Baker Mayfield going to get traded to Carolina, right? Well, now Matt Corral's got a chance with his arm talent, and I'm a big Matt Corral fan. You're going to put him in an offense that has a couple of weapons. And if you're working like that, read option zone kind of scheme with Christian McCaffrey, where you're going to have a bunch of screen passes, you're going to have a bunch of easy check down passes to Christian McCaffrey, but then you also have a mobile quarterback who can pull it and run it in those situations where it's like he's got one-on-one and 10 yards in front of him, and he can actually pick up some yards without getting hit. Matt Corral's going to be awesome from that, and he's going to be able to throw the deep ball too to Moore, who I don't know why I can't think of his first name. I swear my name DJ. Thank you. My name dyslexia is getting worse and worse every pod.
JD.
But I actually love how most teams approach this. But the one thing I feel is like I don't think it was intentional. I don't think teams went into this being like, hey, handshake agreement. None of us are taking quarterbacks until the 3rd round. I think there was a ton of gamesmanship, and I think it was probably insanely stressful to be in the war room on Friday and Saturday night when a lot of these quarterbacks were taken off the board. Scotty, your team, as you said a little earlier, took a quarterback with Mr. Irrelevant, but you didn't like the pick necessarily because obviously you want to have, a little bit else there. But like Jimmy G is still probably going to get traded before the start of training camp, but by the time the season starts.
So I'm not so sure, but yeah.
You don't think so?
No, I'm not so sure. I'm really not sold. I think they're in a position now where they need help elsewhere on defense, particularly. So if they're going to make a trade, that's what they need to seek out. But I think on the offense, Jimmy G's in a position where it's going to be his position to lose, and they're really going to do him really wrong by him, I think. and the first, stretch where he's not playing well, they're going to be like, all right, well, that sucks. You're benched. Bye.
Maybe, but that doesn't strike me as how that organization runs. I mean, John Lynch I think John Lynch is going to Mac, because the other thing too is they traded up to get Trey Lance in the top 5, right? Mm-hmm. They made that pick. And part of why they did that, and part of why they were okay with sitting Trey Lance for a year, is because they want that 5th year of control, right? They want to have that. And at some point, like Jordan Love to me at this point is a sunk cost. Jordan Love in Green Bay, and that would be the worst case scenario for San Francisco, because it's not like you have Aaron Rodgers playing ahead of Trey Lance. You have Jimmy G. So either Trey Lance is that bad and they've done that bad of a job of developing him that he can't see the field, or they're just waiting for the right trade package for Jimmy G. I would be shocked if Jimmy G is on the team opening day.
Yeah, the problem with that is the market got completely saturated with the Trubisky signing in the offseason here. So I think to your point, we might be in a spot where we can wait until somebody's getting injured in week 5, 6, 7, get a team that is in need of a reliable quarterback that will overpay potentially for.
But that could also happen in training camp. Like there's usually, because I go back to the Carson Wentz thing, right? Like Carson Wentz was going to be the backup behind Sam Bradford. And then, Teddy Bridgewater blows out his knee. Minnesota makes the trade for Sam Bradford. And now all of a sudden Carson Wentz gets put in the starting lineup. Now we haven't had a starting quarterback go down in the preseason training camp in a while, but there are going to be couple weeks. Yeah. So at some point, this is the year where it's like, all right, well, this is kind of like Trey Lance's rookie year, but if he's not beating out Jimmy G in training camp, then that's definitely a big red flag for the Niners. Speaking of the Niners, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and Vido, you were the one that brought it up. Still have not heard anyone else talk about this, and maybe it's just because I don't know why. Maybe it's not as big of a deal as we kind of made it out to be. But the fact that we ended up with actually 9 teams not having a first-round draft pick because Arizona traded out of the first round, that has to be the most in NFL history. I can't fact check that.
I believe so.
I wasn't able to find it online.
Yeah.
But 9 teams without a first-round draft pick, and those are a mixed bag of teams. So we have Chicago, who's a rebuilding team. You have Cleveland, who's kind of in a win-now mode. Denver, who is in a win-now mode because you have Russell Wilson, so you kind of have to go after it. Indy, who's a win-now team. The Rams win now. Vegas win now. Miami's win now. San Francisco's win now. But also all those teams might be in win now, but the rosters aren't necessarily equaling out to that. So of that crew, and obviously both of your teams are included in that. So we can start with your 2 teams. How are you feeling about, how the Broncos, how the Niners did without their first round pick?
Man, that's a good question, because it was a very different feeling waiting so long to pick. And honestly, in my whole lifetime, it's been very few times where the Broncos didn't have first round pick. We're usually just not one of those teams. But for me, I loved the fact that whenever we didn't get to pick, we were just talking about the fact that we had Russell Wilson. So it's still this
it's worth it.
Great
Your first round pick was Russell Wilson. Yeah.
And not to compare, but like, it's not like we traded a bunch of firsts to draft a player that may or may not work. We got a proven commodity. So to me, that's
how I feel with AJ Brown.
Yeah. It feels great. Right. So
that
to
must
me,
be
that's
nice.
Great. Honestly, Scotty, right? It's a whole different situation than your Niners. What do you feel? Because this is still right. This first is still off of the Trey Lance move.
100%. And well, one of the, I believe it was the Saints that had that Miami. No, who had that Miami pick? That was one of ours. Anyway, I'm not feeling great really after that draft. I don't know what the strategy was. They went edge in the second with their first pick, and then they go running back and wide receiver in the 3rd round. Why? When the glaring obvious need is in the defensive back. Jaquiski Tartt is gone after this year when he's a free agent. The Niners will be happy to unload his salary. That's the mainstay in your defensive backfield right now, save for Jimmy Ward. So to wait until, and we'll get into this when we do the late round steals, but to wait until even the 5th and then not until the 7th to get a defensive back and not use one of those, not use any leverage at all because to get into the first round, because you traded it all away to go get Trey Lance, who's not even playing, right? So to not even get into the first round or make a move to get into the first round to be able to go get one of those defensive backs. And I'm not talking about a guy like Stingley or Sauce Gardner. Those guys are going to be off the board. There's no way we were trading up that high. But, you know, late first round, we saw like guys like the guy from Florida, Kyrie Lim. Why aren't we drafting into the back end of the round to go get a guy like that?
Well, you didn't have
trading. I mean,
you said it though. You didn't have the assets because of the Trey Lance pick, right? From last year, which I understand from your perspective as a fan is frustrating. But you also have, first of all, I love the Drake Jackson pick, and I brought him up. He's a great edge player. I think he's going to fit in really well in San Francisco. I know he's a USC guy, and I know that's not your favorite, Scotty, but he's a good player. I think it's a really good fit. The running back thing, I don't hate, because once you do have Trey Lance in there, you're going to be running the ball with him and with running backs. And the history over the last few years, San Francisco has needed as many running backs as possible, and they turn them all into really good players because of the scheme. And the dude from LSU is a really, really good running back. He was one of the biggest sleeper running backs in this draft class. So I think you have something to be excited about, as well as they had the kid from Ohio State who got hurt last year, who will ultimately be back playing. The point you make about the cornerbacks, though, and I was going to bring this up when we were talking about Nakobe Dean, the second round pick and cornerbacks as a whole in this draft, there was a steep drop off, right? You had the top two guys, you had Kyron Williams, and then you had a couple of hybrid dudes like Daxton Hill, right? And Andrew Booth from Clemson.
Booth,
but then after that, and Trent McDuffie as well, you had a bunch of guys who were first or like really early second round guys, and then a steep drop off. And then you're talking about like the cat from Houston. And he was the last, and because I looked this up when I was trying to figure out
Kobe Bryant. I mean,
well, Kobe Bryant was there, but I also I like Kobe Bryant, but I also understood why he didn't go, right? Marcus Jones, the cornerback out of Houston, was the only guy really who I would have been like, if the Eagles had not taken Nakobe Dean, take Marcus Jones. But if they had, we could have had a third round cornerback. But at the same time, like, I would much rather have Nakobe Dean. So they definitely made the right pick there. That 3rd to 7 range for cornerbacks is completely hit or miss, right? You had Cordell Flott from LSU, who was an okay player, but even he went off at pick 81, which is before you guys picked in the 3rd round anyway. So you would have either had to reach up or reach back, right? Trade back at the end of the 2nd round and taken somebody, or you would have had to spend more assets that you didn't have. And the other thing I'll say here too, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is a rare year for undrafted free agents. The Eagles signed Mario Goodrich, who was the cornerback opposite Andrew Booth, who, in my estimation, slightly less athletic, but basically the same production as Andrew Booth at Clemson this year, and played on a really, really good defense for Clemson this year. That is a high value pick. And it's all because of the COVID year where we had this backlog of older guys who didn't go out last year, but were still borderline NFL players. And that's why we saw a lot of small. That's why we saw a guy like Troy Anderson get drafted ahead of Nakobe Dean, right, out of Montana State, because he had almost 5 years of tape that told you, this dude is actually a really productive player, even though he played at the FCS level. So you just had a lot of that. I think it was a hard draft to navigate. And I think what San Francisco did was they took the best players for what they do at the best points. And they didn't over focus on need necessarily. They just took the best players that were there.
The one thing to go back to your original question is, how do we think our team's drafted? I thought the Broncos did okay. There were a couple picks I liked, and it was actually my favorite pick was probably in the 4th round. We drafted Damari Mathis, a corner out of Pitt. I actually really liked him. And if you watch his tape, I mean, he played very well against Penn State. He played very well against probably his best opponents, which I thought was really fun to see. And the other note on corner, there were a few other I had there. In general, I'd say the Broncos did okay. If you include the Russell Wilson, we fucking dominated. But
that's the
on the corner front, there was a guy who we mentioned off camp, Gregory Jr., the guy that Auchika Baptist went to the Jaguars in the 6th round. We had TCF, Tyree Castro Fields out of Penn State, go to San Fran actually late. And Scott, I mean, he's out of Penn State, yeah, but he's 6'1". I mean, I think what you're seeing is you have athletic guys who have the length to play in the NFL, and maybe they were hit or miss in college, but they're drafting again to see what can you do when you're in the NFL, and you need that kind of length. Now, we have seen some guys go shorter, but I just really like some of these picks that are later. There is a drop-off in terms of certainty, but I do think there is an athletic ability in college football at the corner position that we really probably, I would say in the early 2000s was not the same. You know, there are just so many 3 wide receiver sets, even at the high school level now, that the talent, both on the wide receiver and cornerback side is pretty deep. So I'm actually really excited to see some of these later round guys. And maybe that's because the Broncos took 2 of them, but I am excited to see some of these names. And to your point, Jeff, some of the unrestricted free agents that teams signed to be on their practice squad. Some of these guys will end up on a roster, and some of them will make a difference. I guarantee it.
Well, and Schefter has a tweet. He puts it out every year, but like there's more Hall of Famers that were undrafted than first overall picks, right? And then like more second round. Like there's a couple of stats out there that like make you fall in love with the idea of undrafted rookies. And I'll say this, pump the brakes on that, just like pump the brakes on a lot of these late round guys, right? We're excited because we're right here. And yes, there's always the chance that you're going to land on the Jordan Mailata, right? Which was a shot in the dark, and you hope that it worked out. And luckily it did. But you know, and even like someone like Avonte Maddox, right, for the Eagles. And yes, I'm using Eagles examples, but they're just kind of on the top of my head. You know, Avonte Maddox was the 4th round pick. Quez Watkins was a 6th round pick. Like there are guys who can play at this level, but the likelihood that you hit on them is not typically that high. I'll say for your boys, Vido, Nick Bonito, I thought he was a borderline 1st round talent. And the fact that he fell all the way to the last pick of the 2nd round for y'all's first pick, I thought that was a fantastic pickup. There is definitely still the stigma with Big 12 edge rushers, Big 12 linemen, D linemen. And he's technically an outside linebacker, but he's just going to be rushing the passer for you. He's a great rotation guy to have in. I think that was an awesome pickup. And I also loved Greg Dulcich, because if we're talking about, hey, we had to give up Noah Fant, Greg Dulcich was my favorite tight end coming into this class in terms of on the field. Grant, we still love you. You're still number 1 in our hearts, but I love Dulcich. Dulcich is a freak athlete, and in addition to it, he can block, he can catch the ball. You know, we talked about it when we talked about Chip Kelly and that UCLA team. They're a running team. You know, people think Chip Kelly, they think passing. No, they were a running team. They asked him to do a lot, and he can catch the ball. I think he's going to be a great fit with Russell Wilson. We know how Russell Wilson has elevated his tight ends over the years, right? He's made Luke Wilson look awesome. He's looked Gerald Everett look awesome. He's made these guys
killed Graham's career. He's been hit or miss for sure.
I mean, part of that's I would say Graham too, but like even Greg
I would
Olsen,
say no matter what the talent, they were always, to your point, at a certain level of like in fantasy, to your point, having Russell Wilson's tight end is always going to be a top 10 tight end.
Yes. Yeah. I would agree with that. Right. And I would also say too, you know, when it comes to Russ, like you look at someone like Greg Olsen at the end of his career, who wasn't much of an athlete anymore, the corpse of Greg Olsen out running around out there. And yet he was still a productive player for Seattle in his last season in the NFL. So
it's so bad that I compare those two just because they're Gregos. In my mind, like when we drafted them, like, oh, we got like, you know, Greg Olsen kind of style. It's just so funny. I instantly just compare those two guys.
Yeah. I think that was a great pick for them. Let's take a look. Chicago's an interesting one, right? They make the trade up to go get Justin Fields last year, and they spent their first 2 picks this season on defensive backs, Kyler Gordon out of Washington, and then Jaquan Brisker, Penn State guy. Love the Jaquan Brisker pick. I think he's going to be a really, really good player, if I'm being totally honest.
Wow.
Jesus Christ. And then they also got, I think, one of the more sleeper wide receivers in the draft, in Velus Jones Jr. out of Tennessee, dude who put up really good numbers for a very middle of the road, like growing program in the second year there, or I guess first year there, for Tennessee. How am I blanking on the coach's names? This is what happens when you're not working like college football every single day.
Not the NFL.
No. Yeah, the Tennessee Vols, man. The guy who was the coach at UCF after. Oh my God, this is killing me.
Josh Heupel.
Josh Heupel. Thank you.
Heupel,
Josh Heupel, Heisman dude, played at Oklahoma. Really good offensive mind. and has done a really good job in just 1 year at Tennessee, trying to help flip that program. Velus Jones Jr. looked great last year with a very mediocre quarterback. So for them, I like what Chicago did, but again, they had a ton of picks. I mean, they had, I think, 12 picks here in the draft. And then went out and got some guys who are going to help them right away. I think Jaquan Briskett's going to come in, and Chicago still has a good defensive line, good linebacking core. So you're going to load up the defensive end here with the defensive-minded coach coming in from Green Bay. I think that was a really good pick for them. The Cleveland Browns were another one here. They didn't pick until the 3rd round, but they stole 2 guys who I think will be great players for them because they're going to be rotational guys who are going to be able to slide in. David Bell, the wide receiver out of Purdue.
Yeah.
Love David Bell. I think that is a late round steal for them. They've done a really good job in that spot for wide receivers over the last couple of years. You look at Donovan Peoples-Jones, right, as a prime example of that, who's come in and has been really productive for them. And with, Jarvis Landry come back, you're getting another weapon for Deshaun Watson. 3rd round guy, again, with how deep these wide receivers go. If you transplant David Bell back 10 years ago, he's probably a 1st round pick. That's just how deep we are at the wide receiver position right now. And then Perion Winfrey, the defensive tackle out of Oklahoma, similar to Benito. It's that Big 12 bias. I thought Perion Winfrey, his size, again, he's going to be a rotational guy for an already stacked defensive line in Cleveland. The rest of it. Oh, and they also had one of my favorite players in the draft and another position they've done a really good job at, Jerome Ford, the running back out of Cincinnati. Now I can't believe
he's gonna be with their 3rd or 4th string. It's just incredible because you're to the rotation point. They've had injuries, but man, I love him, and they're going to be able to use him whenever.
Who was the running back who they had, who was the wide receiver hybrid, the kid from UCLA left? Dearness Johnson obviously came in. Demetric Felton, right? So yes, right. You have Chubb, Kareem Hunt, Dearness Johnson, who had that sick game at the game you were at, Vido, the Thursday night game against Denver. Now that you add Jerome Ford and you have Demetric Felton there, that's 5 dudes. And the thing I like about Ford is he's similar. He's not quite, because Demetric Felton at UCLA was like, you could use him at wide receiver, slot, outside, and at running back. Swiss Army knife kind of dude. Jerome Ford is definitely more running back first, but he just adds depth. And with Chubb and Hunt, you want insurance there. You want a dude who is fast. And Jerome Ford, he didn't just beat dudes. He broke away from dudes, like absolute burner with the ball in his hands. So I like that pick for Cleveland. And Cleveland is clearly in that, like, hey, we're trying to win now, right? Like, we have Deshaun Watson now. We have a good defense. We have one of the best offensive lines in football when they're healthy. Let's go all in. Fuck it. Why not? Denver, we talked about. Let's go to Indianapolis.
That's where I was going to go.
Their first 2 picks, honestly, the first 3 picks I thought were all great. We'll start with their 3rd, Bernard Raymond, offensive tackle out of Central Michigan. He was a dude who some people actually had as high of a grade as like mid to late 1st round. But a lot of people had some concerns about him. There's some injury history with Bernard Raymond. To get him in the 3rd round, I thought was a great pick, especially for a team that, offensive tackle has been a position of need for them for a while. And then the 2 pass catchers, they got Jelani Woods, who is as much of an athletic freak as we have. When you talk about size, speed, and just rawness, we touched on him when we did our draft preview at the tight end position. I love Jelani Woods, and it just gives another weapon there for Matt Ryan to have. And then Alec Pierce, the wide receiver out of Cincinnati. I think he's the only pause I have is I think a good comp for him is Michael Pittman, right? It's a big bodied wide receiver. Speed's not going to blow you off the charts, but is plenty fast enough to play in the NFL. Separation might be a little bit of an issue when you're talking about NFL cornerbacks, but if he's their 2nd or 3rd wide receiver with Michael Pittman on the other side, I think that's a really good pick. And they got him in the 2nd round. He started jumping up draft teams, draft boards for a lot of teams. And during the season, there was this buzz of like, is this guy even going to be a pretty good pro? Is he too slow? Yeah. Right. All the things you say about a white wide receiver, right, is like, oh, is he going to be fast enough to do this? I mean, upside for him is, I think, really, really high because he's got plenty of speed and his contested catch ability is really good. But that also brings a little bit of concern when you're talking about, if he's having contested catches in college, it's the same thing with Drake London. What's he going to do when he's going up against NFL cornerbacks?
Yeah. Right. No, I thought those top picks for them were great. I absolutely love Bernard Raymond. I can't believe that, again, he fell to that third round. And that, I think that was, to me, one of the best picks of that third round itself.
Yeah. I to me, their best draft pick, best value draft pick was Nick Cross, the safety out of Maryland.
Mhm.
I mean, just explosive, can play on outside, inside, can play with the tight end. He ran the fastest 40 time of all the safeties. And he's a really tough kid and great in pass coverage. Absolutely demolished Penn State the 2 years that he started.
I was at the game this year. I mean, Jahan burnt him a couple of times, but I mean, that's how good Jahan is too.
Jahan's that good.
Yeah.
But I think Nick Cross was like early second, and they got him at 96 overall. Did the Colts. So I mean, that's a great value pick for me.
Yeah, to me, the other team that I was just shocked, like once you recap, right, you sit back and you look back at all the picks. The team that I was just so surprised that I think drafted so damn well were the Chiefs. Given they had a lot of picks, so it makes it easier to have 2 firsts and 2 seconds. But they went with Trent McDuffie from Washington, the corner. Then they get George, help me on the name here, Jeff.
Karlaftis.
Thank you. I always mess that one up. Then they get
Don't
Sky
ask me.
Moore. Yeah, they get Sky Moore and Brian Cook, he was at Cincy. And again, that Cincy team, they had, I believe, 9 players drafted. So it was pretty incredible to see that. Yeah, for a Power 5 school, I mean, that easily puts them up there as one of the best, if not the best, Power 5, with the old Boise 2007 game team against Oklahoma, who won. But in general,
how many of those guys ended up being good pros, though, is the question.
Right.
Because I think, when you're drafting players who win, like what the Eagles did, right? They were drafting Alabama guys last year and Georgia guys this year. That's one thing, but with Cincinnati, it is still group of 5 recruits, right? But at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say like, oh, well, they're going to be Boise State from that year either.
Right. I just think in general that the Chiefs in their first 4 picks, and even you go to the getting the linebacker out of Wisconsin, Leo Chenal, there were a couple picks that I was just like, damn, that was a really good player. And the Chiefs, I feel like, picked almost the best player for them at a lot of these spots. I was really impressed. And that was one team to me that really jumped off the board once I looked back.
Wisconsin linebackers are never a bad bet.
Right.
They're just never, if you're going to draft a linebacker from a school.
Or O-lineman.
Yeah, or O-lineman. Honestly, anyone on the defensive side of the ball or the offensive line or running back. Wisconsin just puts out really good pros because that's the kind of guys that they go after. I do want to say the Rams drafted Kyron Williams, which spoiler, he was one of my favorite late round picks. Great running back out of Notre Dame, and just adds to a room because this is what they've done, right? It's been the Darrell Henderson picks. It's been the Cam Akers picks, right? These are the things that a good team with a good
Cooper
foundation, right? I just mean like from the running back perspective, they've always cycled through late round guys. They approach the running back position perfectly in my mind. And what I've been banging on the doors for years, being like, why are we drafting a bunch of running backs super high? You can find value later in rounds. I really like what they did there. And again, just adding another proven player who's got 4 years of playing experience at Notre Dame, but, didn't start a whole lot, was split, didn't really start full time until this year. Before Kenneth Walker exploded, going into the season, a lot of people thought Kyron Williams was arguably the best running back in football. And the other thing too, is they lost his entire starting line from his junior year to his senior year, at least from the 2020 season to the 2021 season. So he went from having one of the best offensive lines in football to having a very mediocre offensive line who, albeit did start to play better as the year went on, and his game improved with that as well. So I thought that was another really good pick.
Speaking of running backs, speaking of Ken Walker, and it pains me to say this, but I love the draft that Seattle had. Like they did really, really well. Just an unbelievable job. They shored up every position they needed. They got Charles Cross. They got Kenneth Walker in the second. Abe Lucas out of the tackle out of Washington State to shore up that left side. And then Kobe Bryant slipped to them in the fourth. So I think they just did a great job.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have drafted a running back that high for them just because that's drafting a running back in the second or third round. Like you're looking to try to, again, it's a win now move. You can find guys in undrafted free agents. You can find a lot of running backs who in free agency are just walking the street. Honestly, guys who are right around the NFL who can come in and be productive for you.
Ken walking the street.
There you go. There it is. The last couple of teams, Vegas didn't really do anything that jumped out to me. The The Miami Dolphins were another
Except
one.
to have Wayne Newton as their first draft pick announcement.
Yeah, right. Miami only had 4 picks, started in the 3rd round, but their first pick, they took Channing Tindall, inside linebacker from Georgia, right? Which is, again, it's that whole idea of, hey, are we going to take just a player from a good team who's got decent upside and didn't get a chance to see the field a lot because of how many good players were on that Georgia team? You know, when you're playing behind or sometimes next to Nakobe Dean, yeah, you're not going to get all the reps at inside linebacker. I thought that was a really good value pick for them. And then your Niners, we covered there at the end as well. So really interesting draft from that perspective. Last thing here before we take a break and touch a little bit on the NBA, your sleeper picks, right? Guys who went on Saturday who you think have a chance to be really, really good pros in the NFL. We can start. Whoever wants to go first, go ahead and grab.
I got a laundry list here. All right.
Go ahead, Scotty. Run through.
So Saturday picks, Kobe Bryant was Friday, so that I won't count that one. How about Ty Chandler, a 5th round pick? I'll get a little Mel Kiper on you. Running back out of North Carolina, excellent upside, great passing game, can catch the ball really well. He's got the strength to pound the run too. He was a 5th round pick to Minnesota. Also on my list are 2 Penn State guys, not to be a homer. But Rasheed Walker, who was a 7th round draft pick for Green Bay, offensive tackle out of Penn State, just an unbelievable pass blocker, really quick in the short explosive game. Excellent point of attack for the run blocking. Needs to get more consistent, but a really, really great value pick. He's a big dude, and he'll be able to do well protecting the one and only Aaron Rodgers. And then we touched on a little bit earlier when we talked about cornerbacks, but not to be a double homer, but this was a cornerback that the 49ers drafted, Tariq Castro Fields at Penn State. Is big, physical, fast corner, can play regular pass game and nickel. He just pushes guys to the middle, uses his strength and his length to make plays. He's 6'1". He's a great kid. Unbelievable pick in the 6th round for the 49ers.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I basically have one for each round, if that's cool. So in the 4th, I actually really like Zamir White, and I think this is a good place to draft him. Running back out of Georgia, he's a beast, and he definitely makes it tough to hit him. Like he's a pretty, I would say, just shifty running back. In the 5th round, it's the first pick. It's Sam Howell. To me, I couldn't believe that Washington got him that late. The Washington whatevers making a great pick there because, again, you're securing a chance at your future and a solid backup situation with Carson Wentz, who has gone down basically every year that he's played in the last 4. Last year, I guess I don't think he went down last year, but
no, he did play. He played on the 2 sprained ankles. Don't know how
that's
he
right.
played with 2 sprained ankles, but he found a way.
And then in the 6th, it's obviously talking about being a homer, Grant Calcaterra. I just think the upside there is just incredible for the Eagles, and to get him that late is great. I think there were a lot of worse tight ends taking over him there. And then in the 7th round, this is actually for me a guy I didn't really fall in love with until the draft, and they started showing some stuff, and then I went back and looked at him and was like, oh damn, no way. It was actually a guy taken pretty late here. It was Andrew Stuber. He was a guard out of Michigan, and when you watch this tape, he played a lot of good teams really well. Now, I will say that, I usually, I'm not really staring at guards in the 7th round. Like that's not where I'm looking at value, but for some reason it was a guy who jumped out once they showed some tape and rewatched some of the draft there. It was really fun. New State, we kind of looped it when we were on.
And Michigan too. Michigan, won the Joe Moore Award, right? That goes to the best offensive line in football. In college football, and he was a starting guard on that team. So I agree with you. I have a few here. Isaiah Spiller. I said he was probably one of my favorite running backs. He goes to the LA Chargers.
You were real high on him in the preseason college football too.
Yeah, I see the speed. Like there's something about the breakaway speed, the shiftiness, the catching the ball in the backfield. And he goes to the LA Chargers, where it feels like it's been Austin Eckler and then Justin Jackson for like 5 years. right? Like,
Yeah.
so to add a young, fresh set of legs there, a guy who can make some moves, I love that addition because I think immediately he'll come in and supplant Justin Jackson. He'll be the number 2 guy. You'll see him on third downs because he's got big playability. They got him in the 5th round. I thought was an absolute steal and a great need for a team that is right on the cusp. You know, if he's the Corey Clement kind of guy that can put you over the edge, I think it's a great pick. This one's a little interesting only because they just drafted a quarterback last year, but I loved Bailey Zappi to New England. That felt like a very New England pick. I mean, this is a dude who broke every single passing record in college football last season, is a gamer, but is definitely still a little raw, but small school guy. He's got a little of that Jimmy G vibe to him, or maybe all of a sudden Mac Jones is struggling. Mac Jones gets hurt. Maybe it's Brady and I can't remember the freaking quarterback. Drew Bledsoe.
No.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, but I was even
but
thinking,
also
who's the guy who came in? Matt
Castle.
Matt Castle, the 10
right.
11 and 5 year, then he gets traded. Yeah.
Yep. So in 2009. So, you know, maybe it's something like that. But either way, I think it's a smart player. It's a cerebral player. It's a perfect New England player. They get him in the 4th round. And look, Brian Hoyer has been the backup in New England for a decade, it feels like, too. So to get, again, another young player they can develop there, I think was a good pick. I have 3 other ones kind of, but 2 went to the same team. Jamari Salyer, guard from Georgia. He goes to the LA Chargers as well.
Yes.
Now they drafted Zion Johnson in the 1st round. So I don't think it's going to be a big deal there, but depth at the offensive line for the Chargers is huge. And they have 2 guys now. Zion Johnson's going to go in and probably be the starting guard at the start of the season. But now you're going to add another dude in Jamari Salyer, who honestly is big enough to play tackle in the NFL, but that offensive line at Georgia was massive.
And he played all 5 spots on the line
throughout the season. So you're getting a versatile offensive lineman who's a big dude. That's a great pick. And then the last 2 were Baltimore Ravens picks. I have Daniel Falele, the offensive tackle out of Minnesota, who is that physical monster of a human being. I think that's, again, quintessential Baltimore Ravens pick. And then a guy who I would put money on now, you will see playing for the Baltimore Ravens at some point this year, the running back of the 6th round pick for them, Tyler Batty out of Missouri. Just another really good SEC running back. And when you play in Missouri and your speed is on par with the Alabamas and there's other teams that you're playing out of the SEC, Texas A&M, and you're scoring big touchdowns, you're outrunning guys, you get him in the 6th round, those late round running backs can be huge players for them. And with, you know, KJ Dobbins is coming back, but who knows what happens with Gus Edwards? Who knows what happens with some of these other dudes with all those injuries they had at running back? Having a dude like Tyler Batty is Beatty, I think it is actually a really nice player. So those are my picks. NFL draft. What a fucking weekend. One of my favorite of the year. All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll touch on a little NBA playoff basketball, and we'll get you on your way to the rest of the week. With the NFL draft over, that was kind of the last major sporting event we have before it just becomes NBA basketball, because we're now in the 2nd round of the NBA. Since we last talked, I was depressed about the Sixers. The Sixers go out and beat Toronto by 35 points. And now Joel Embiid is going to be missing for, what seems at least a minimum of 2 games. I would be surprised if we see him. He's got the orbital fracture over one of his eyes, though he has had this injury before. But he had the surgery and then came back three weeks later. So if he's going to play, he's going to be playing with the mask, and doesn't look good for Philly. That's okay. We drafted Nakobe Dean. Everything's fine. And then we also, since the last time we talked, we had game 6 between Memphis and Minnesota. The Grizzlies win. And then they go on against the Warriors in the first game of the 2nd round, and an absolute nail biter, phenomenal game between Golden State and Memphis.
Yes, it was.
Golden State holds on to the end, even with the ejection to Draymond Green. And then the other game we had on Sunday was Milwaukee and Boston. Now, Boston, of course, Boston does this. I did a whole thing at the start of the pod on Friday, you know, hyping up the Boston Celtics. They have to be my new favorites in the entire NBA to win the title, and they got absolutely bodied by the Milwaukee Bucks. It felt personal with Drew Holiday going up against Marcus Smart. You know, oh, Marcus Smart, you're defensive player of the year. I'm going to show you what the best defensive guard in the NBA is going to do, and he put him through an absolute blender. I would expect Boston to bounce back, but this was the first time really since the new year that Boston hasn't quite looked like that. It looks like December Boston and not what we saw post New Year Boston. So here we are 2 games in tonight as we're recording this now. This is Monday. We have the Sixers and Heat game 1 and then the Mavericks Suns game 1. Both of those will go on. Oh yeah. And the Phoenix Suns also just blew out New Orleans to close it off. Shout out to the Pelicans, by the way. Unbelievable run for them and a really likable team. And if they get Zion back next year, if they get healthy Zion back, which by all accounts, even though there's all that drama with him, it seems like he wants to stay in New Orleans, even though, there's been some stuff with his injury.
Well, the playoffs will do that to you, Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty enticing thing. I heard some people kind of comparing it to like the bubble Suns when the Suns went on that like 9-0 win streak in the bubble. And then they needed, like, even if they won all of their games, which they did, they were going to need something else to happen. And then Chris Paul was that piece that took him over the edge. Well, maybe Zion's that piece for New Orleans. Who knows? I want to start with the Boston and Milwaukee series because with all the debate between Jokic and Embiid and the MVP and then KD too, and everyone said a different person who the best player in the league is. And Giannis is just over there like, hey guys, you remember me? 2 MVPs, 2 Defensive Player of the Years, reigning NBA champion and NBA Finals MVP. My knee went backwards and I came back 2 days later and still helped win the NBA Finals. Remember this guy? Yeah, we remember who that guy is. And it felt like with Giannis is just hitting a level right now where I think he is undeniably the best player in the NBA. Like I don't think anyone else can argue it. Like he's the best player in basketball right now.
No, there's no argument there. I mean, look, and he does it at both ends of the floor, right? We talk about like a guy like Chris Paul now, who had an amazing game 7 against the Pelicans,
14
of 14
perfect
to end the game. That is unbelievable. And even guys like Steph, who we talked about as really more offensive potent threats. Giannis is doing it at both, even KD. To an extent, but Giannis is doing it at both ends of the floor, and he's done that throughout the 2 MVP campaigns he's had. He did it throughout the entirety of the playoffs last year, and he's doing it again this year. And it's not a slouch, it's not a fluke. It's like that's just how good Giannis is, and it is time that everyone start literally paying attention to the fact that this is the greatest player in the world at this time. I'm sorry, LeBron. Like, it just hand the torch over. It's fine. It's all good. Giannis is the best. And there's no question about it.
But why? That's my thing is what is it about? Is it just that he plays in the small market? Is it that this quick flip nature that we have with NBA players, we're already on to the next big thing? I mean, like, Giannis, because that's the thing. Giannis didn't even dominate it wasn't like he had some 40-point game. He had a ridiculous stat line, 24 points, 13 rebounds, and 12 assists, right? So an unbelievable performance from Giannis, but that goes to his basketball IQ, right? He knew like, yeah, I'm so physically dominating, but I can't necessarily, like, I need everyone else to do well. Drew Holiday led the team in scoring. He had 25. He had 3 steals. Like Drew Holiday was amazing in this game and his impact on the floor. Like the box score can't measure how great Drew Holiday was in that game. But I just still see Giannis finding ways to dominate without it just being overpowering people, which for years that seemed like the thing that we kind of held to, not against him, but the thing we always said about him was like, oh, he can just dominate. It's like Shaq, but he's doing it passing the ball. He's doing it shooting, decent from 3. And even on his off night scoring, he still was the most dominant player on the floor after we just saw Jason Tatum bury the Brooklyn Nets.
And he all of what you're saying is true. And again, from my perspective, the thing is, he's not my favorite player to watch. I would rather watch Embiid. And I think the way Embiid moves, and I know how talented Jokic is, and it's an incredible thing. But for me, there's something about the way Embiid plays and how, like, to your point, the Joker doesn't. I won't want to say that. I would just say Embiid.
This is Giannis.
Oh, you're talking, yeah. Well, even at Giannis's case, like all of these NBA, what you would say MVP candidates, right, that you talk about, and all these different things. There's an aspect of style of play, And I think that's the conversation that people will somehow blur into dominance on the court. And they are different. To your point, Embiid doesn't really ever, like, offensively, he's going to overpower you. Like, that is what's going to happen. And he can, right? And he does. The thing that I really love about both these guys, they play both ends so well. It's why people fall in love with a guy like Klay Thompson, because he plays both ends so well, and he'll take your best player and he'll also score, like, a little less than Steph, but he still has the willpower to score, especially at his prime. And I just think that people fall in love with players that play on both ends, but style somehow falls into it. And you're right. I think small market honestly does have a lot to do with it. If I'm being honest, like, he is not seen as much. And when you see him, it's usually on a commercial about them playing a big market team is when he's premiered, where you're going to hear Embiid all the damn time.
Yeah, Giannis is so physically gifted. I mean, the dude's 7 feet tall. He handles the ball. I think we're still reminded of young Giannis, like this dude who was nothing but the Greek freak, right? And then we don't give enough credit to the other areas of his game that he's improved. We don't give enough credit to the fact that, I mean, he is, in my opinion, the best defensive player in the league. There's no one more physically imposing, even with Embiid at the rack. Like, Giannis has that too at 7 feet tall and at his size. But Giannis also, as a passer, as a ball handler, as a shooter, has slowly developed all these skills over the course of the years. But yet we still look at him and we're so quick. I don't know why we don't want to embrace Giannis as like he is the face, but I think that's when it's like, well, he plays for Milwaukee. But like, there's not a single person who covers the NBA or is around the NBA who doesn't love Giannis. Giannis is just nothing but joy and loves the game and is fun to be around. And people just love this dude. I mean, the fact that he goes into his post-game press conferences with a book that's literally just called like the Book of Dad Jokes. And he just reads a different joke out to start off his press conference,
I can vibe with that.
Going and getting especially you, Scotty. Yeah. But going and getting the 50-piece, nugget meal from Chick-fil-A after winning a championship, when he discovered that, like, he opened up a press conference one time being like, did you guys know that you can dip Oreos? Like, you can dip an Oreo in milk and eat it. And like, there's just so many interesting, he's so likable. And yet for whatever reason, and maybe it's just how cynical we all are in social media, he's almost too nice. He's almost too likable for us to have these debates, because all he does is dominate, win games. And what was the best defense in the NBA, they just absolutely bodied. And Giannis had whatever he wanted. And he was able to also, even when his shots weren't falling, he goes 9 for 25 from the floor, but he still gets everybody else involved in the game. And this is the scary thing for Boston. Giannis played to his standards a pretty average game, right? Yes, but he adjusted, which is a big sign. But like 6 of 11 from the foul line, right? 0 of 2 from 3, 9 of 25 from the field, only 24 points. If you had just said those stats and said that was what he had in game 1 and left out the rebounds and assists and that kind of stuff, I would have said, oh yeah, Boston probably wins that game by 20, especially without their second best player in Chris Middleton, who is a walking bucket. It's at this point he can single-handedly carry teams, and it's amazing. The Golden State Warriors, again, they win big. Jordan Poole, at this point, there's just no other conversation to be had other than just Jordan Poole is an absolute stud.
Can you believe that? I mean, like, if he continues scoring at this rate, like, we have to be the favorites, right?
Well, this is like
when you pair him with Steph and Clay.
What's crazy to me is this is like, it's almost like this. So in football, you can only have one quarterback start, right? But to me, this is almost a handoff of like from Favre to Rodgers, from like Steph to Poole. Like, this is an incredible young player. And the fact that they're on the court at the same time is fucking incredible.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it's that. And you have Klay Thompson there too. I mean, Klay goes 3 of 10 from
and Wiggins.
3. And yeah, I mean, Wiggins has been really good in his role. The more impressive thing here for Golden State, and this is where that continuity, that like, hey, look at the last 6 championships. We've been in 4 out of the last 6 championships. Like, we're not done. I know, between Steph's injury and Klay's injuries and all that, like, yeah, we haven't been on the court. We haven't been in this moment for a while, but our dynasty is still intact here. And when you look at it from a bigger picture perspective, you look at like the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs won 5 championships, and they all came in 3 different decades. They won in 99, they won in the 2000s, and then they won in 2013, 2011. The last year that they won there when they knocked off the Miami Heat, right? So And honestly, if it wasn't for Ray Allen, they probably would have had a 6th championship in that run too. Like dynasties can last a long time. And I give credit to the front office for the Golden State Warriors for believing in that. And Jordan Poole, yeah, technically was off the bench. He played 38 minutes. He just didn't technically start, but 31 points off the bench, 5 of 10 from 3. And you're adding another dude who scares you that way from, I mean, that's like the one thing that can slow down Boston or Milwaukee, who I think one of those two teams will end up representing the East in the finals. That 3-point shooting, when they're that way, there's nothing you can do. And the fact that Draymond gets ejected after only 17 minutes in this game, he gets ejected at the back end of the first half. And that's what Draymond does for them defensively. He is the quarterback of their defense, right? He's constantly getting everybody moving. He matches up with whatever team's big man is against them so they can play small.
He played Jokic the entire time in the first round.
Yeah. And he's going up against, like Valanciunas and Jaren Jackson Jr. And like Jaren Jackson Jr. had a night. That's because for the second half of the game, he didn't have Draymond Green going up against him. And ja had his amazing game. But if Golden State can win without having Draymond for an entire half, it says a lot about where Golden State is. Draymond just needs to make sure we don't replicate what happened in 2016 and getting ejected
and kick a guy in the nuts
because of too many flagrant fouls. That's the
no
big
doubt
part for Golden State.
Yeah, he needs to be on the floor.
Where's your championship meter at right now as a fan, Scotty?
Approaching the 90th percentile. I mean, look, like if those 3 guys play and score, Steph, Clay, and Jordan Poole. Not only that, you got Looney who can play in the inside. Look at some of these switch plays that they ran yesterday. They're running passes out on the perimeter, and all of a sudden, Looney's open down low, Otto Porter's open down low, and it's the extra pass that they make that they don't need to take the 3, but they can take the 3. And hey, but also Otto Porter's open right for an easy dunk. But then on the defensive side of the ball is what really gets me going, because it's Gary Payton, it's Klay Thompson, it's guys who did it all year, but like the big and Draymond and the big play making that both Klay and Steph Curry had one of the biggest defensive plays of the game and late in the fourth quarter yesterday. And it was a stop on Ja Morant driving to the hole, just like it was at the very end of the game where Klay Thompson pushed a driving Ja Morant all the way out to an angle where he couldn't hit the layup, and the Warriors hang on to win. It's the defense like that. And Jordan Poole's doing it too on that side as well, pretty adeptly. So,
well, they've always been such a good defensive team in communicating. And the fact that they did that without Draymond in the second half, I think was the most important piece of all of it.
Exactly.
And Kuminga comes in there off the bench when Draymond goes down, and people are running, all right, well, what are we getting out of Kuminga, who was this, kind of a risk, but also they had the first round pick this year, played pretty good for a rookie, man, in the playoffs. 6 points,
love him too.
6 rebounds, plays really, really hard, is the best athlete on the court. I'm almost there with you. I think Phoenix getting Devin Booker back is different, right? He didn't look great in that game. And I think tonight against Dallas, we'll see kind of where Devin Booker is at, but him coming back ahead of schedule to go up against New Orleans was a big deal for that team and for that whole playoff run after an unbelievable regular season. But that being said, 3 is still worth more than 2. And if you're having any 2 of those 3 Splash Brothers getting hot, I mean, Steph goes 5 of 12 from 3. That's kind of an off night for Steph.
Yeah.
You're going to have big Steph nights. Clay had an off night, but then Jordan Poole goes 50% from 3. And Steph was also 8 of 8 for 2 from within the 3-point line.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting looks at the basket when he gets to the rim, and when Steph can mix in that, I'm getting to the hole and I'm going to finish, that's always been the most underrated part of his game, is how good of a finisher he is because of how amazing he is at shooting. It's always an afterthought, but when he's able to get to the hole and is able to finish around the rim, and again, if Draymond's healthy defensively, I think they end up comfortably getting past Memphis here, because game 1 is oftentimes the biggest misnomer when it comes to how a series is going to go.
It's a gauge,
Well, but I think people gauge it too far in either direction, because I don't always think that game 1 is indicative of how the rest of the series is going to go.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah.
So,
but yeah,
we'll see. The other big news out of the NBA, and I said at the top, Joel Embiid, fractured orbital bone above his eye. I had this tweet about Pascal Siakam because I don't believe in saying really mean things about other players. It was a cheap shot. It was a dirty play. It was an unnecessary elbow in a game when your team's getting blown out by 35. That being said, the Sixers were up 29 points when Joel Embiid got hurt. So maybe Doc Rivers don't have Joel Embiid in the game. Just a thought. But, hindsight's always 2020. But I said this about, Pascal Siakam. Like, I don't want anything bad to happen to him, but I want him to have like at least 2 years of just a bunch of minor inconveniences. Like the check engine light is just always on in his car. He can only find one of his 2 socks like every other day. Like just little things that are going to kind of bother
They're
him.
always out of bags when he goes to the grocery store.
Yes, exactly.
And like the bag always, he has to use the paper ones and the handles rip off, shit like that.
Yeah. I don't want anything really bad to happen to him because he's a nice guy and I love his story. And also he's a human being and we're talking about sports. So why would you wish evil upon anybody? But yeah, I mean, also kind of fuck Pascal Siakam for what he did because that was. I just seemed unnecessary, but also fuck Doc Rivers for having Joel Embiid in that game at that point. So
the people's elbow.
It's a shame because the way the Sixers looked in the second half against Toronto, that was enough to make me think they actually had a good shot against Miami. Embiid's not playing in game 1 or 2, so we need like a vintage James Harden just do everything and Tyrese Maxey have a fucking night. And luckily for them, Miami, their 2 best players, or at least 2 of their best 3 players, are all banged up with injuries. It's just, it goes back to the rant I was going to do if the Sixers had lost to Toronto, which is just Embiid's luck, man. Embiid's luck is just as unfortunate for a superstar as exists. And you can go all the way back from the Sam Hinkie stuff to the injury pre-process to everything, man. And for a dude who is as dominant and as fun to watch, the fact that there's a really high likelihood that in year, almost 10 for him, that he's not going to get past the second round of the playoffs is just, it's a shame for the NBA because you don't know when that cliff is coming.
Yeah. And the one time he was healthy in the postseason, when they got swept out of the first round.
Yeah. Well, there was the Toronto series with the Kawhi shot, and that was just game 7. And then last year, his teammate was afraid to dunk a basketball, even though he's 6'10". So, Embiid has had a tough stretch of luck, and it's not dissimilar to AI. AI was so good. Now AI was a lot more difficult to play with than I think Embiid is. Embiid, I think, gets it a little bit more. But if they can steal 1 of 2 in Miami, and then we get Embiid back for game 3, I'm not going to rule it out. But as a fan, I've kind of already accepted the fate, which is a shame coming off the high of that 35-point win against Toronto, because you're thinking, man, they showed out in Toronto in game 6 when everyone else was talking about you're going to be the first team to blow a 3-0 series in NBA history. And then you win by 35. And then, one of the best players in the league gets hurt. And that's
part of it too. Not only the fact that he shouldn't have been in that game, but the Sixers shouldn't have been at that point in the series. They should have wrapped that shit up a long time ago.
That's a great point, Scott, because I had that same thought driving back down from Philly yesterday, which was like, not only does it suck because Embiid shouldn't have even been in that spot literally in the game, but the team as a whole shouldn't have been in that spot in the series. And
random thought that popped in my head when you said this, by the way. Everyone talks about all-time teams from their whatever, and obviously the Sixers, if you don't know, like, I have one of the best historical franchises out there in terms of great players, Worthy and all these, Dr. J. But I would love to see AI and Embiid together on the floor. Like just this big guy who's absolutely athletic. I don't know if it would fit together. It would be so damn fun to also watch.
It would be super
interesting. Yeah.
And Embiid like yelling at him, and Embiid just like going after him, and then he'd be like, screw you, man. Like he's got an attitude too. It would have been so
I tell you what, it would be as entertaining as hell. It would be crazy entertaining.
Yes.
And sometimes it would look unbelievable. But I also think it would be a little bit like Kobe and Shaq, because Kobe and Shaq were both that way in LA, and AI, and they wanted to kill each other by the end of it. And I think Embiid and AI probably would be similar, but I think Embiid, peak Embiid with peak AI would be fascinating.
Talent-wise, unbelievable. But the question wouldn't have come from a reporter to AI. It would have been Embiid asking why he wasn't at practice. And AI would have said, "Why? We're talking about practice, man."
And the funny thing is 6-foot AI would go after 7'3" Embiid, and he'd be sitting there with his face up, what's up, big man? The trash talking would be delightful. Last thing I want to say here, I didn't tell you guys about this, but I did open up the pod with it last week, and JMU has been going through a tough time over the last week and a half after the passing of one of the softball players, Lauren Burnett, committed suicide. It's been a really tough time for JMU Nation as a whole. They announced today that they're canceling the rest of their season. And so I just wanted to last minute just throw a shout out. I know I said this again to open up the pod on Friday, but it doesn't have to be a school or a tie or anything. You guys obviously have no real ties to JMU other than me, right? This is just a human thing. And so just thoughts and prayers to everybody. I can't imagine what that team's going through after the high of last season, going all the way to the Women's College World Series, to now one of the starting players who was there at the plate during that amazing play, with Odyssey Alexander, but also this is their sister, and softball is a very tight-knit group of people. So just wanted to throw that out and to mention that again. Hug your people, love your people. And send your thoughts and best wishes to that group of young women who are going through some shit right now. And I commend JMU for saying softball doesn't matter. Softball right now is not important. What's important is that our people have the support that they need. So thoughts and prayers and our love to everyone involved with the Dukes and down to Harrisonburg. And just love your people. I love both of you guys. You're the best. And I love all of our listeners and everyone else who's out here. So thank you all for listening. Awesome pod today. Amazing story. Congrats, Grant. What an unbelievable story for Grant Calcaterra and for you, Vido, to have that moment with close family friends. And it's playoff basketball time, man. So the pod, I'm hoping to have one of my guys come on here on Thursday or on Friday's pod to talk a little bit more NFL draft recap. We'll get a little bit more in the nitty gritty, and hopefully all three of us can be on for that interview with my buddy Chris Blank, but we will see. Still working out some details. If not, we will have another pod ready for you on Friday. So for the boys, I'm Jeff. We love you. We thank you, and we'll talk to you guys then. Take it easy, everybody.